The wind rolled across the Wyoming plains like an invisible tide, bending the grass and rattling through the bones of a broken corral. The sun was slipping low, setting the sky ablaze with orange and violet light. Somewhere beyond the hills, a horse neighed, and that sound carried across the dry air to the lone figure standing before a ranch house that had seen too many winters. Caleb Danner was a man made of silence and dust. The townsfolk of Sage Hollow called him the Lone Rancher, partly because his spread was a day's ride from the nearest neighbor, partly because no one ever saw him with company. He'd fought in wars, lost a family, and come home with a heart so worn that even the stars seemed to pity him. His days were measured by the creak of the windmill, the lowing of his cattle, and the thud of boots on porch boards. That evening, as the horizon bled its last light, he saw them, two riders emerging like mirages from the golden haze. They rode side by side, their horses matching stride, and even from a distance he could tell something strange about them. The same posture, the same tilt of the hat, the same steady rhythm in the saddle. When they came closer, he realized why. They were identical to Chinese women, twins, with dark hair braided down to their waists and faces that mirrored each other so perfectly that it made the mind spin. Their long coats were dusty from travel, and their eyes carried the shadow of faraway mountains and the memory of long journeys. Caleb's hand rested instinctively on the handle of his Colt, not out of malice but habit. Strangers were rare in these parts, and twin strangers rarer still. Evening, he called out, his voice deep as the plains. The twin, on the left, reined in her horse first. "Evening, mister. We're looking for the Danner ranch. You found it." The second twin smiled faintly. "Then maybe we've found what we came for." Their names were May and Lin, daughters of a Chinese railroad foreman who had died during the Great Push West. They spoke with grace, each word carefully chosen, like they had learned English from poetry instead of people. They explained that they had inherited a deed, something about a patch of land once promised to their father but never honored. The paper led them here, to the heart of Caleb Danner's territory. Caleb listened without interrupting. His eyes flicked between the two sisters, unable to tell them apart, except for the subtle difference in how they met his gaze. May was bold, her eyes bright and searching. Lin was cautious, quiet, as though measuring every breath of the wind before speaking. When they finished their story, Caleb said only, "You'd better come inside. The night bites hard out here." Inside the ranch house, the fire cracked and spat. Shadows danced on the walls, wrapping the three of them in a flickering warmth that felt almost like safety. Caleb poured coffee strong and black and set it before them. May sipped first. "You live here alone?" "Most of the time." "Why?" Lin asked softly. Caleb looked into the fire. "Because everyone I ever tried living with ended up buried before me." The words hung heavy in the air, and for a moment none of them spoke. Outside, the coyotes began to sing to the moon. The twins exchanged a glance, one of those silent, sisterly conversations that didn't need words. Then May reached into her saddlebag and drew out a folded piece of parchment. "This is the deed. It says our father owned 20 acres somewhere near Cottonwood Creek. We thought, maybe you'd know where that is." Caleb took the paper and studied it under the lamplight, his brow furrowed. "Cottonwood Creek runs right through my north pasture." He set the paper down slowly. "If your Pierre was promised land here, he never claimed it. That was 30 years ago. Promises don't age," May said. Caleb gave a rough chuckle. "Out here they do. The wind takes most of them before they're even spoken." But something about the determination in their faces stirred something long buried inside him. He'd seen plenty of people pass through Sage Hollow chasing gold, justice, or ghosts, but these two weren't chasing. They were reclaiming. And he respected that. He offered them the guest room, though it hadn't been used in years. The bed was old, the quilts smelled faintly of cedar and dust, but it was better than the cold ground. As he showed them the room, Lin paused by an old photograph on the wall, a woman holding a baby in front of the same house, the hills behind them still green from spring. "Your wife?" she asked gently. Caleb's voice lowered. "Used to be. No one asked more." That night, the house, long silent, breathed again. Caleb lay awake, staring at the ceiling beams, listening to the soft murmur of voices from the next room. For the first time in years, there was life under his roof, and it stirred things in him he didn't expect: hope, fear, and a strange curiosity about the two women who shared the same face, but carried such different hearts. The next morning dawned cold and silver, Frost clung to the fences, and the horses snorted clouds into the air. The twins were already outside, inspecting the lay of the land. May was crouched by the stream, tracing the flow of water with her fingers. Lynn was sketching something in a small book. Caleb saddled his horse and rode over. "If you're planning to stake a claim, you'll need a surveyor," he said. May looked up. "And if we're not planning to leave?" He studied her for a long moment. "Then you'll need more than paper to hold your ground here," she smiled. "We've survived worse than wind and men." By noon, word had spread to Sage Hollow that 2 Chinese twins were staying at the Dana Ranch. The town was small, gossip traveled faster than wildfire, and not everyone was kind. Some laughed. Others whispered. A few muttered darkly about foreigners owning Western soil. When Caleb rode into town for supplies, he heard it all and said nothing. But when someone spat the word, outsiders, his hand twitched near his revolver. That evening, when he returned, the twins were tending to his horses. Lynn had soot smudged on her cheek, and May had braided her hair up to keep it from the wind. The sight made him pause on the porch. He hadn't realized how empty the place looked until they'd filled it. Over supper, May told him about the railroads, about nights spent sleeping under stars that didn't belong to her, about the men who laughed when she said her father would have land someday. Lynn listened more than she spoke, but her eyes never left Caleb's. He found himself talking too about his ranch, his war scars, his loneliness, about the wife he'd lost to fever and the son who never grew up. It wasn't like him to talk, but with them the words came easy. Later, when the fire burned low, May said softly, "Maybe this house needed more than one soul to keep it alive." Caleb looked at her, then at Lynn, who was watching the flames as though she saw stories in them. "Maybe," he said. Outside, a storm was brewing. Thunder rumbled like distant hoofbeats. The wind clawed at the shutters. The twins retired to their room, and Caleb sat alone for a while, the firelight flickering over his rough features. He felt something shift inside him, something dangerous and tender all at once. When the storm finally broke, he rose, checked the doors, and went to his room. Through the thin wall, he could hear the soft murmur of the sisters' voices, the comforting rhythm of their shared world. And for the first time in years, Caleb Dana fell asleep not to silence, but to the sound of life in his home again. Outside, the prairie howled. Inside, 3 hearts, 1 broken, 2 determined beat under the same roof, each not yet knowing how deeply their fates would soon intertwine. The morning after the storm, the prairie smelled of wet earth and sagebrush. The sky was a bruised blue, and the clouds drifted like tired travelers. Caleb stepped outside, pulling on his hat and squinting into the light. The rain had washed everything clean. Every fence post gleamed dark with moisture, and the creek ran full and fierce again. He turned when he heard laughter, a sound so rare at the Dana Ranch that for a moment he didn't recognize it. The twins were by the corral, sleeves rolled up, trying to calm a spooked colt that had jumped the fence during the storm. May was holding the rope, her boots dug into the mud, while Lynn whispered softly in Chinese, her voice low and steady like a song. Between the two of them, they tamed the animal without fear. Caleb watched, arms crossed, a faint smile ghosting across his weathered face. He'd seen cowhands twice their size get thrown trying the same trick. When the colt finally settled, May grinned up at him. "Not bad for outsiders, huh?" Caleb chuckled. "Reckon you two could teach half the town a thing or two." They laughed, but Lynn's expression turned thoughtful. "Half the town wouldn't take kindly to learning from us." Caleb's smile faded a little. He knew she was right. Sage Hollow had its rules, unspoken, narrow, and cruel to anyone who didn't fit their mold. Inside the house, they shared breakfast, cornbread, beans, and coffee strong enough to wake the dead. The twins sat across from him, and for a fleeting second Caleb saw something he hadn't seen in years, a family table that didn't feel empty. But peace in the West never lasted long. By midday, riders appeared on the ridge, 3 men in dusters, their silhouettes sharp against the horizon. Caleb recognized them instantly. They were from the Hollow Creek Association, a group of ranchers who believed the land west of the creek belonged to them and no one else. Their leader, Jed Crowley, spat tobacco into the dirt when he rode up. "Heard you got company, Dana. Heard they're planning to plant roots where they don't belong." Caleb stepped forward, his shadow cutting across the porch. "They're under my roof. That means they belong," Crowley sneered. "That deed they got ain't worth the paper it's printed on." Railroad promises don't mean a damn thing out here. May came to the door then, holding the old parchment. Maybe not to you, she said, but to us, it's our father's blood. Crowley's men snickered, but when Caleb's hand brushed his holster, the laughter died. Get off my land, Caleb said quietly. Crowley studied him for a moment, then tipped his hat mockingly. You always did have a soft spot for strays, Danner, but the next time we come back, we won't just be talking. The riders turned and disappeared into the hills. Dust hung in their wake like a warning. That evening, the house was silent again, but the silence felt different now, charged, waiting. The twins worked in the barn while Caleb patched the fence, yet all of them felt the same thing in their chests. The storm wasn't over. When darkness fell, Lynn brought him supper out by the porch. She hesitated before speaking. You shouldn't have stood up to them like that. They'll come back. I know, he said. Then why? Caleb looked out toward the hills. Because I've been running from ghosts too long. Maybe it's time I stand with the living. She didn't answer, but the way she looked at him said more than words ever could. Later that night, while the wind whispered through the grass, May found Caleb sitting by the fire again, his rifle leaning against the wall. You're not sleeping either? She asked. He shook his head. Used to the quiet, hard to unlearn. She sat across from him, the firelight soft on her face. My sister thinks you're dangerous, she said with a teasing smile. And what do you think? I think danger doesn't always wear a gun, she replied. Sometimes it wears loneliness. Caleb met her gaze, and something unspoken passed between them and understanding. That both had lived too long, carrying burdens that didn't belong to them. As the hours passed, they talked not about the land or the threats, but about life. She told him how her father taught her to read by candlelight, using old maps and railway letters. He told her about his wife, and how she used to hum while sewing. Somewhere between those stories, the line between stranger and friend blurred into something deeper, quieter, and infinitely more dangerous. When the fire died, they stood. The distance between them was a breath. May's eyes searched his, full of something she couldn't name. Caleb hesitated. He'd built walls taller than mountains around his heart. But when she reached out, placing her hand gently against his chest, he didn't pull away. He took her hand in his rough one and said softly, You should rest. Tomorrow might be hard. She nodded, her eyes lingering on him a moment longer before she turned and disappeared down the hallway. That night, Caleb didn't sleep at all. He sat by the dying embers, watching them fade, feeling both the ache and the hope of something new stirring inside him. Morning came red and sharp. The crows were restless. From the ridge, a column of dust rose. Crowley and his men again, this time with more riders. Caleb was already waiting. He'd fortified the barn, hidden the twins behind the stacks of hay, and loaded his rifle. When Crowley's voice rang out across the field, Caleb stepped forward. You were warned, Danner. And I don't take kindly to warnings, Caleb replied. The first shot cracked the air like thunder. Horses screamed. The fight was fierce and fast, the kind that left the world ringing afterward. Caleb moved like a man who'd lived 100 battles, but there were too many of them. A bullet tore through his shoulder, sending him to his knees. Then the barn doors flew open. May and Lynn stood there, rifles in hand. They fired with precision that startled even Crowley's men. The attackers scattered, some dropping, others retreating in panic. When the dust settled, only silence remained. Caleb staggered, clutching his shoulder, and May ran to him. Lynn tore a strip from her sleeve to bind the wound. You fool, she said through tears, you could have died. Caleb smiled weakly. Would have been worth it. For the first time, Lynn's stern composure broke. She pressed her forehead against his. Don't say that. The moment lingered pain, relief, and something sacred all bound together. Days passed. The news spread through Sage Hollow like wildfire. The lone rancher had stood, with 2 foreign women, against a dozen armed men, and lived to tell it. Some called him reckless, others called him brave. But to May and Lynn, he was simply the man who'd given them a home when the world offered none. As his wound healed, the ranch came alive again. The twins planted a garden where the storm had washed the soil clean. Caleb built a new fence along Cottonwood Creek, not to divide the land, but to mark the place where 3 paths had crossed and become one. One evening, under the wide Wyoming sky, the 3 of them sat watching the sunset. The horizon burned gold, and the air smelled of fresh grass and hope. May leaned against the porch post. What will you do now, Caleb Danner? He looked at them both, the twin reflections of courage and grace. "Maybe," he said quietly, "I'll stop being a man waiting for the past to end and start being one who builds something for the future." Lynn smiled faintly. "And what about us?" He met their gaze, his eyes warm. "You stay as long as you want. This land's big enough for all kinds of hearts." The wind moved through the fields like a whisper of blessing. Somewhere far off, thunder murmured, not a threat this time, but a promise. The camera of imagination pulls back. 3 figures on a lonely ranch, framed by endless western sky. Not strangers anymore, but a family bound by loss, love, and the wild mercy of the frontier.